Some spiritual beings seem to definitely prefer the dark shadows of the evening in which to pursue their activities. Here, 3 Weird World viewers give accounts of their astonishing encounters. Mike. In the early 1970s, Mike Tanner and 3 of his friends decided to travel down from Surrey in England to watch their football team play a pre-season friendly match against Bournemouth and to make a weekend of it. They set off early in Phil's brand new Mini Cooper and watched the game with no problems. Early in the evening, they discussed what to do for entertainment. Instead of staying in Bournemouth, which is a large, vibrant South Coast town, one of the group suggested that they go on to a nearby place called Swanage for a night out. They caught the ferry over and found a nice pub where they chatted to 2 young women who were on a holiday. They had nowhere to stay, so the women suggested they try their bed and breakfast accommodation. They dropped the women back there, but the owner wouldn't let them in, as by then it was about 11 p.m. He said that they wouldn't find anywhere this late, and helpfully suggested that they park their car in a nearby park a little way down the road. They found the park, which seemed an ideal place for a night stop, with even a restroom about 100 feet to their right. Phil switched off the lights and the engine, and as they had enjoyed a very full day, Mike sat back in the passenger front seat and closed his eyes. He was just about to drop off when one of the friends in the back shouted, "What's that old guide doing?" Mike opened his eyes and saw this very large shape, which he estimated to be 6 to 7 feet tall, black or grey in colour, and which appeared to be eerily shimmering. The bizarre figure was gliding along a wall about 150 feet away from the car and at an acute angle to it. Unfortunately, it was moving away from the men, so they never saw its face as it glided to the end of the wall and then vanished. It had been visible for about 10 to 15 seconds. The friends finally fell asleep, and the next thing Mike remembers was that it was morning and they decided to have a look where they had seen the thing. When they investigated, they found 2 aspects they certainly had not been aware of the previous night. The first was that the wall was part of a graveyard, while secondly, the wall was not flat but pointed, so nobody could have walked along it, let alone glided, anyway. There was no follow-up to the event because Mike never found an explanation for the strange figure, despite there being 4 witnesses to what he would describe as a ghost. Scientifically, he had no idea exactly what it was. It was not a cloud of mist or fog because it had a human shape, but it was huge, and from memory, Mike says that it appeared to be hooded as well. Chris is also from the United Kingdom and sets the scene way back in September 1968. He had a job working at a garage in South London, Streatham, and shared a small bedsit with his best friend at the time. At one stage, he had a week off work due to being ill, but when he went back, his employer would not pay him unless he had a doctor's sick note. He was not registered with a general practitioner in the area, so spent a lot of time trying to get registered and obtain the magic sick note. It took so long that he was getting a bit desperate, with both him and his friend skint and needing some money to carry on surviving. His friend came up with the idea of approaching the nearest hospital and telling them Chris was ill in order to obtain the sick note. So they set off walking to Tooting Hospital and got there around 5 o'clock and came out at 1:30 in the morning with the required certificate. It was now very dark with no one around at all except for Chris and his friend as they started walking back to Streatham on the main road. As they walked, they fell in behind a woman walking 50 yards or so in front of them. Soon they were walking just a short distance behind her when, at the end of the street, she turned left, and when they got to the end of the street, she had completely vanished. Strangely, there was nowhere she could have gone, and not enough time for her even to run somewhere. The weird event started Chris's friend winding him up, saying that Tooting Common was strange at night and that police did patrols in their cars, shining their headlights across the common. Chris did not want to show that he was feeling a bit scared, so when his friend suggested they take a shortcut across the common, he only very reluctantly agreed. The pair walked for about 10 minutes when his friend suddenly stopped in his tracks. They had come to where the railway embankment had a small tunnel footpath to go under the railway. Opposite were some Victorian houses on a corner, and coming from one of them was a thwacking sound, quite loud, as though someone was being whipped. His friend stopped dead in his tracks and refused to take the footpath arch as he sensed very bad vibes. However, the alternative of going over the railway tracks was potentially deadly, as there were live rails there. They stood there arguing when all of a sudden his friend exclaimed, "What the hell is that?" On the path there was some kind of bizarre, seemingly alive creature writhing around, just like a film effect. Around it there emanated a glittery sheen of particles like a Walt Disney animation effect. The glitter moved up the form vertically and drifted away over the railway line. Then the horrifying creature that was writhing around took the form of a small man with a flat hat and on crutches. He looked right at Chris's friend as he stood under the streetlight on the corner. The shape shifting was clearly visible and inexplicable, astonishing the two men. Chris looked at his friend, whose hair was standing on end, as was his own. They ran under the small arch and off the common, and as they got away, Chris's London-savvy friend said he thought they had encountered something to do with black magic being conjured up in one of the nearby houses, and to look out for a sign of black. Chris scoffed at it all, refusing to believe what they had both witnessed. The crunch came when they got back to their flat, and on the doorknob was hanging some black women's underwear. With both shocked to the core by the bizarre being they had witnessed, they did not sleep a wink, and soon after became so freaked out that they left London never to return. Chris swears that this account is completely true, and they hadn't even been drinking, as they were both broke. He has never forgotten any of the eerie details. Mikey Bloomfield says that the coolest thing about this experience is that he shared it with a grown-up, as he was only 11 or 12 at the time. It took place in the early 2000s, during wintertime and late afternoon on a cloudy day. It was the last hour of twilight as he and his mum's ex-boyfriend, who was in his early 30s, headed off to collect some wood in a forest that he knew nearby. They went on the Rousham single-track road, just off the Banbury Road in Kidlington, Oxfordshire, seeking fuel for his mother's and aunt's chimney fire. They arrived at a woods called Waterley's Copse and started loading the man's truck, then decided to walk on and have a small wander. The pair came across a trail in the woods that a farmer had obviously cut through the foliage, so Mikey looked left and then to the right, and there he saw a man standing in the small roadway and pointing a shotgun. The man was either pointing at something or creeping towards something with his knees slightly bent. Mikey addressed the man, saying, "Excuse me, mate, excuse me," several times, but received no response. He looked back at his mum's ex and said, "Do you see that?" He said yeah and nodded, so Mikey bravely continued to address the man, saying, "Excuse me, mate, excuse me," several times. At this point, Mikey had moved no more than 3 steps forward, leaning forward and saying, "Excuse me, hello," but was still receiving no response. The strange figure was only a few metres away and to the right of Mikey and his companion in the road. He showed no movement, no blinking, nothing, just blank, staring eyes, a piercing stare that was frighteningly still. The man looked on high alert, but also panicked and tense and strong, as if ready to take on some adversary. Eerily, he had no colour to him. He was just a cold grey colour all over. Mikey said, "That's a bad man statue," and looked back at his mum's ex, whose eyes showed shock while his face had bleached white. He was obviously terrified and within seconds just sprinted, with Mikey pursuing and saying, "Stop, stop, it's just a statue." Mikey momentarily stopped and turned around, but the spectre was gone. The pair walked back to where they had seen him, and he had completely vanished. If he had retreated, they would have heard every dead twig and leaf crunch underneath his feet, something that couldn't be avoided in the dried-out, echoey woods. The trees were also so thinly distributed that they would have been able to spot him from a distance, but he had just disappeared into thin air. The mum's ex was completely spooked, and the event never left Mikey, who 18 years later bumped into him on a dog walk. They talked about the bizarre experience, and the ex confirmed that that was exactly what had happened. The ghost had seemed to date either from the 1800s or the Edwardian or World War I era because of the way he was dressed and his curly moustache. He was wearing an old war uniform of some kind and looked to be in his 50s or 60s. Mikey also did some research and found accounts of an apparition that has been spotted around Oxfordshire. The ghost is a gamekeeper who still patrols the woods and countryside with his rifle and doesn't seem to realise that he's passed on. Mikey quotes Albert Einstein, who suggested a scientific basis for the reality of ghosts based on the first law of thermodynamics. If energy cannot be created or destroyed, but only change form, what happens to our body's energy when we die? Could that somehow be manifested as a ghost?